When I'm flipping in the summertime, I am thinking outside the box like I am with all my summertime techniques, because you've got to realize that you are fishing for highly pressured fish. So you can't just go out seeking a flipping bite and die with a beaver or some type of craw in your hand and think that you've done everything you can to make that bite work. So in the cooler months, you know, you have a jig as an option if it's the fall or the spring. You know, my rule of thumb in the springtime, if the water's somewhere in the mid to low 50s, it's going to be a full-size jig. If we get cooler than that, it's going to be a finesse jig. And once I think the fish are starting to make a push shallow for spawning reasons, you know, these fish have been out in the abyss for months. You know, they've been in the creek channels and out in the main river channel. There's not that many people out there fishing for them. For that reason, they're not seeing a whole lot of bait, so I don't think there's a whole lot of trickery in it. I think if I can put this bait on the piece of wood that the fish may be relating to, or put it in their bed, if I'm getting that bait around those fish in the springtime, the cooler months when the fish are biting, it's going to happen. I'm not too concerned on that. I'm more concerned about covering water, getting the right weight sizes, making sure I'm landing fish. That's really what I'm looking for in the spring. Making sure I'm in the right areas, right part of the lake. That's really important to me in the springtime. In the summer, I know I'm fishing for fish that have been fished for a lot. I know a lot of the fish are residents, the ones that still want to be shallow. They still want to live on shallow cover in the hotter months. Those fish don't leave. Those fish stay shallow year round. Or you also have those transient fish that may go out deep if it's to seek refuge or eat. Let's say there's some bait out on a hump. They're going to go out and feed. Then they might swim back to a dock. They're under that dock not to eat. So for that reason, you have got to try a couple different things. They're going to be very specific on what makes them react. The same thing may go towards, they may go out deep, but they're coming back shallow to, you know, they're going out deep to seek refuge. Then they're coming back shallow to feed, but it's something specific. They're really keyed in that time of year on what they want to bite. So if you're just thinking, well, I'll just go flip this around, it might not always work like that. So I am going to start with just your tried and true flipping baits this time of year. I've done fairly well on your beaver style or your creature style baits. I will try both, you know, your subtle gliding type creature baits. And I will also go with your baits that kick and have a lot of action. They both work day to day, and I will change them out. The jig for me this time of year, when that water is hot, I'm just not a big fan of the jig. I've never really done well on it this time of year. I don't start implementing this bait till that water starts cooling off. Gets at least down into the low 80s and starts getting cooler. And, you know, fish are starting to key in on crawdads, more on bluegill and stuff like that, and that jig is a great offering for that, but it's not going to happen for me until the fall with this bait. So we've tried our normal baits, and let's say we know there's fish going to be shallow. There always is. Lakes that have a lot of cover shallow, there's going to be fish that are either the transient ones or the residential fish that live shallow year round. But again, these are fish that are hard to catch, so you can't just give them the good old standby baits. You've got to start implementing these baits that flat out catch fish and turn them into flipping baits. And what I mean by that, the Senko, if you're from Florida, you're probably thinking, dude, this is all we flip down here. But this works all over the country, and there's some lakes where this just works better than a creature style bait. There's some lakes that just really like long, slender baits. So obviously this bait works great on a wacky rig. It's probably the best thing you can throw. It works great just rigged Texas style weightless, but it is also a really good flipping bait. So for me, if I'm fishing shallow and I just feel like, man, there's got to be some fish there, but I know they've seen too many of what I'm trying to catch them on, like a dock where there's always going to be fish, doesn't matter what time of year, changing up my offering, giving them something that just has that allure to it, they just can't resist, try that. Now, another bait, very similar in that it just has a very unique action. The fish don't see it, nearly as much in a flipping application, but it's a tube. A lot of northern fishermen throw this religiously. It kind of loses its popularity once you get into the South, but it is just different than other baits. I think that's what makes a beaver style bait so good, is because of that gliding action that a tube has, but this glides even better. It's just a different feel when they get in their mouth, and it's one of those baits that I'll flip it year round, but for sure I'm breaking it out this time of year. If I'm really, really sure that there's got to be some fish shallow and they're not biting my bait, I will switch to this. So for this bait, this is one of those baits that if you don't have it rigged up right, you will lose a lot of fish on it. So I think that's another reason why the fish don't see it as much. Guys get discouraged from throwing it because of fish loss. So I will give you my rig and I'll explain every bit of it. So I do use a bobber stopper on this because right now I'm fishing it around lay down trees and docks, and I'm skipping that bait, and it's really hard to skip a Texas rig if you don't have that weight pegged down. So I peg the weight. I'm going 5/16 ounce weight. I never really go too heavy on a weight size when it comes to a tube because you want that glide. That's what makes it so good. And I do like that long, slender worm weight because it just seems like it fits that bait better. So this is a 5/0 hook because I have a 5-inch flipping tube. Most flipping tubes are going to be 4 inches, and then all the other tubes are going to be smaller than that, the ones that you put on jig heads and finesse fish with. This is a bigger one. So this is important though that you get this part right. So you're going to go through the top of it just barely, because when you have the eye of your hook come out, you want it out of the bait a little bit. That's going to help you land more fish. You don't want that part of the bait buried up. And I know it's going to look a little bit funky, but the way this thing falls, that's not going to deter the fish from biting it. You're going to come all the way through the bait, and you have to use an extra wide gap hook on a tube and then just barely bury that tip up in there. Sometimes that tip can come out. It's still going to be fairly weedless, and that is the rig right there. Now that looks not so appealing on camera right now, but when you see it in the water, it really has great action. You got to give that a try when you're flipping. So a soft plastic stick bait and a tube, they really have a fall that no other bait has. So when you're fishing that dock that may have seen 5 or 6 boats that day, the fish that are under there, they're not trying to eat, you can coax them out with a little bit different offering. So give that a try, guys. I appreciate you guys watching. Good luck to you, and I'll see you on the water.